Go ahead and take it away, Caitlin. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thanks so much, Brennison. Yeah, like Brennison said, my name is Caitlin. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a youth therapist at the Domestic Abuse Project. And my coworker, Mary, is here today, so shout out to Mary. Thanks for being an awesome coworker and managing the chat today. So if you all are putting questions in the chat and I'm not responding to them right away, hey, Mary. It's because I'm managing like a couple my thoughts and my anxiety and all these things. So I will do my best to be attentive to all of you. And yeah, special shout out to the women's advocates for the amazing work you all are doing in community, and for our ASL interpreters. You all are awesome. And yeah, and to like everyone who cares about young people and has young people in their life. And yeah, I think I covered it. Cool. I'm just seeing people say hello. This is kind of cool. This is also my first webinar, just so people know. So this is a new experience, but okay. What else? Maybe I'll just give a quick trigger and content warning. I'll try to be more specific as we approach like some of the more difficult content, but just in general, really want to invite everyone to take care of yourself in whatever way feels best for you. I've tried to be as trauma informed as possible, and there are always ways to improve. So also welcome your feedback. Okay. Let's see. I'll figure out how to change. Oh, there it is. So a little bit about me. I like to start here, just so that we can set the tone of thinking about the kinds of identities that we're carrying, and the lens through which we're seeing the topic, and kind of like how we're relating to teen dating violence. Obviously, this is just like a tiny snapshot of a human being. And I do think like every part of me impacts teen dating violence, and every part of me is impacted by teen dating violence. But I like to be transparent about a few things, just so that you can, just basically so that I can be transparent about what my strengths are in coming to the conversation and what might be my limitations. And I really do believe that we need everyone in the conversation, and we all have something to offer, something to contribute, which we'll talk a little bit more about, which we'll talk more about when we get to the prevalence of teen dating violence. So I am white. I identify as queer and non-binary, use they, them pronouns. My first language is English. I have a graduate degree, and I also have like economic stability, a stable income. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a trauma therapist, and I'm currently getting my somatic experiencing practitioner certification, which I won't go a ton into, but maybe the one thing I'll say about that is that I'm often thinking about everything from this trauma lens. And I think like both professionally and personally feel like really, really interested in addressing trauma and how to intervene in the cycle of trauma, and especially intergenerational trauma, and interpersonal trauma too. And I'm a US citizen, and I grew up in St. Paul and Minneapolis. So for those of you who are joining from, oh, hello from DV Shelter in Bolivia, North Carolina. Awesome. Sorry, I just like see the chat every so often. Folks joining from other states. This is where I'm at. Hello to all of you, where you all are at. And we can bookmark this whole conversation. I'll come back to it in a minute. Okay, other notes about my role. So again, just a snapshot. I, occupy a lot of roles in my life. These are some of my professional roles over the last 7 years. I've been working at the Domestic Abuse Project for 4 years. I started as a clinical intern in the Victim Survivor Program, and then I was hired on as a full-time staff member and youth therapist. In my role as a youth therapist, I co-facilitate a caregivers group with Mary, and just like have deep respect and admiration for all caregivers, especially now during COVID. You all are awesome, and I appreciate you all. And then what else do I do? Oh, I have a caseload of individual youth clients that range in age from like 6 to 20 something. So I work with teens, tweens, and young people in that capacity. I also do early childhood work with caregiver and kiddo in the room together. So that's usually with kids 5 or under. Before that, I worked for 2 years at the University of Minnesota with students on academic probation. And before that, I did a year of focused training in adolescent development. Whatever that means, we'll talk about it. Okay. I'm just still figuring out, okay. So what I thought I was gonna do today was tell you all the fancy information and give you all the fancy advice. And then I came with the help of my partner to understand that that was super adultist in my approach. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my process around this, because one of the things I'll talk about later in the presentation is just kind of like the broader kind of social cultural influences on how we're relating to violence against young people and teen dating violence in particular. And I do think that part of what creates an environment or a context where that violence is possible is because of adultist conditioning. And I think, like, just again, because we're kind of talking about accountability and how to be accountable to the kinds of harm that we cause or could cause, it just seems important to name that even though I work with young people, and I have worked with young people for a long time in a lot of different capacities, this is still something that goes on for me, and that, like, I need help and support just like all of us. So just normalizing that this is a part of what it means to support young people, and that we can't do it alone. We really need each other. So yeah, there's my little pep talk. Okay, adultism. So for people that, are people familiar with that term? I'm just going to take a look at the chat real quick. Adultism. Okay, Caitlin says a little, no, lots of no's, some yeses. Okay, cool. Does anyone who answered yes want to say a little bit about your understanding? I'll read the slide. Well, maybe I'll read the slide first. Okay. So this was just a quick Google search. Adultism, few ways to define adultism is the power adults have over children, the prejudice and accompanying systematic discrimination against young people, and the bias towards adults, the social addiction to adults, including their ideas, activities, and attitudes. Okay. Got some thoughts in the chat. I'm just reviewing real quick. First time hearing it. Okay. Well, this is really cool. Yeah, for all of you, if this is like new information to you, this is awesome. I think I'm gonna do my best to do a good job describing this, but we'll talk about it throughout the presentation. So if you don't feel super confident right now, that's super okay. Enforce inequities, controlling. Yep, I love that. Or I mean, I don't love those things, but that's a really good way to describe parts of adultism. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so basically it's thinking about any kind of ism, racism, sexism, orphobia, transphobia, homophobia. These are all kind of social cultural forces that contribute to the violence that's perpetrated against certain groups of people depending on their identity or different memberships. So adultism is talking specifically about the ways young people are marginalized. And I think about, oh, sorry. Thanks, Carrie. Yes, I will. Yes, great. Thank you both for that reminder. I'll try to do better with that.
Well, and sorry, Caitlin, real
Yeah.
quick. So this is a really good moment for attendees just to go to the settings in your chat and make sure it's set to all panelists and attendees. It defaults to all panelists, and that will send it just so we see it. And I think that's where the confusion is coming from then, because Caitlin is responding to questions that are only sent to 2 panelists. So again, go into the chat, click that little drop down arrow right by where it says 2 and choose all panelists and attendees, and that should make things easier.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so thinking about the way that I think about this, the first thing that comes to mind for me is how we can kind of talk about the feelings, experiences, or beliefs of teens, tweens, young people. And again, just to offer a definition, when I say tween, I mean like 11 to 14-ish. But yeah, basically the belief system that says young people's feelings, experiences, etc., are somehow less real or valid than that of adults. And I'll have some questions again in some of the later slides. And oh, Cynthia repeated a comment. Great, thank you. Does anyone want to just add a potential example of the way they see adultism operating in the chat? I'm curious to know what's coming up for other people. If not, that's okay too. We'll keep talking about it. Okay, I'll move on and keep an eye on it. Let's see. Okay, I did think about this. So what stories do we tell about what it means to be a young person? Or if you are a young person in attendance right now, are there ways that you have felt kind of dismissed or minimized by people who are older than you? Keeping an eye on the chat, but I'll keep going. And these are just questions to reflect on. No one needs to answer anything right now. So if you're reflecting on your own, that's okay too. I have this specific question about young people in relationships. The term that comes to mind for me is puppy love, which I actually haven't heard in a really long time. But I think there are other messages that young people get in a lot of different ways, that the kind of love or relationship they're experiencing at 15 is somehow less valid or less real than love or relationship that we might experience later on in life. And to come back to that year of training in adolescent development, I feel like a lot of what we did was read research by people often over like 35 with a lot of privilege about what young people should be doing. And that included for example, adolescent brain development, which important to consider, and also important that we're not talking about those things with any kind of hierarchy. Does that make sense? That we can talk about like, oh, you know, young people just don't know better yet. So I'm hoping that like as we move through the presentation and as you move through the rest of your day, you might be thinking about ways that adultism is showing up for you. Okay. Okay, and now you'll have already been doing an awesome job of introducing yourselves in the chat. Just for me to get an idea of who's here, I've included a lot of stuff in the presentation that might not be relevant to everyone. So if folks don't mind sharing a little bit about themselves in the chat, it'll help me kind of present in a way that's most relevant to you. Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. The prompts I have for that, in as much as you feel comfortable, if you want to share a little bit about your identities, you can. Age or generation if you feel comfortable. A note about how you interact with young people if you're an adult. And then if you are a young person, I said 24, but it doesn't really matter, you know. Just a note about how you've been impacted by teen dating violence at some point in your life. And if you don't want to share any of that, you can share a little bit about your day or just watch other people's contribution. I'm going to pause for a second and see what people are writing. Client care, social worker, crisis shelter manager. Yep. Great. Awesome. I'm so glad there's so many folks here with such great experience.
I'm seeing someone who's a group facilitator, and that's so cool. Caitlin and I facilitate youth groups too, sometimes through DAP, but oh, what a great perspective to have and to bring.
Peer counselor, military advocates, youth educator, got some young people. Hey, I see you, we see you. Awesome. Super encourage folks to contribute as they would like. I'm definitely not the expert on teen dating violence. I have thoughts about it, definitely bring my lens and experience, but I'm hoping that we can all kind of share in the responsibility here. If there are things that you feel like are important to name, go for it. Cool. Cool. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but feel free to keep putting your answers in the chat. And then these are just questions for your own reflection. And I talked about this at the beginning. So like a strength maybe of my lens in being queer and non-binary is that I feel pretty sensitive to the ways dominant narratives exclude certain groups of people. So even as I was preparing for this presentation, like pretty much all of the research about teen dating violence is really gendered and very cis-centric. And
sorry, real quick, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Do you want to just go through what cis means real quick? I think probably most of our attendees are familiar, but just want to make sure.
Yes, cis means when your identified gender matches your biological sex. So, yeah. And if people have more questions about that, Google. Google is a great, awesome resource. or maybe other cis people too, if you want to do that. Yeah. Thanks for that. But anyways, so that's like one potential strength. A potential weakness, I think about myself. I'm about to be 34. And as I explained in depth at the beginning of the presentation, this leaves me vulnerable to, or like maybe more vulnerable to adultist ideas and conditioning right now. Okay, so you can kind of be thinking about that for yourself. What are you bringing? What do you want to take with you? Also, I think it can be really helpful to just note, and this is the like somatic experiencing practitioner in me, just like noticing what comes up for you as we move through the content. Where are the places that you feel kind of activated? Where are the places that you feel shut down? Where are the places where you can feel yourself wanting to tune out or resist or even feel kind of angry? No judgment at all, like wanting to give over just a lot of like trust and respect for the things that come up for us. It's all communicating really important information. But just maybe wanting to like bring a little observer to that maybe. And then how you can take care of yourself. Since it's a group chat, like I'll do my best to be mindful of all the different people that we have with us today. And I'll ask that everyone to be sensitive to who's in the room, especially since teen dating violence and relationship violence in general is so pervasive in our society and culture. It's, you know, there are victim survivors here. There are likely people who've used abusive behaviors here. And then we're all coming here with a lot of different identities. So just wanting to like use a lot of respect and kindness and consideration as we participate in the conversation. But if that's not happening, feel free to check out, take care of yourself, do what you need to do. Okay. So what I actually want to do today, instead of being super adultist, is to hopefully give you some helpful information, some suggestions and resources. And I've really tried to take a lot of care to include only resources that have been made either in partnership with youth or by youth completely, or young people, excuse me. I really want to lift up the experiences and yes, like expertise of young people, bring some attention to adultist conditioning and other kinds of conditioning that kind of create the conditions for violence to occur and that perpetuate different kinds of violence. Want to speak from my lens and experience, which is, again, I've never worked explicitly in the capacity of teens or tweens experiencing intimate relationship violence, dating violence, but that's been a huge part of my work with young people in general. And then emphasize our collective responsibility. So I really, really think we are all impacted and we all impact all of these things and can do a lot just in our totally mundane activities to help keep the community safe. So in keeping with my little commitment to you all, just want to, I'm looking for, she wrote something that I'm pulling up on my phone. This is Fatima. She likes to use her Black magic and poetry to make true social change in her community. She loves being able to celebrate the many diverse voices, whether it be at protests or poetry slams. And she writes, youth of all shapes and forms have voices that carry truth and passion. Yeah. Yet the youth voice is lost. It gets buried in single-story stereotypes and societal norms that tells us power comes with age or in the form of a white male. This mentality suppresses true representation and causes individuals to value themselves and what they have to say less. I was lucky enough to find and use my voice to create social change in my community. This handed me a dose of empowerment I never thought I could find in my life. I do this work because I don't want the youth voice to wait. I want to create spaces and environments that promote youth engagement and allow youth to prosper. Young Black and Brown individuals should not be silenced. Young trans and non-binary individuals should not be silenced. Young people should not be shamed for speaking up. Youth have been shaking the very ground of social justice work since the beginning, yet no one really acknowledges it. From Tiananmen Square to the Arab Spring, youth have taken strides in true social change. Young people, despite popular belief, can start a revolution. This is the truth I want to share. Oh, oh, so good. Oh, what, like, I really think, I know. Yes. Just like, this is the vision that young people like bring for us. And it's totally like one of love and liberation. Yes, I know. Thank you, chat. Yes. And this is just like, this is awesome. And I really like feel super invested in just like creating as much space for young people to live into that vision as I can. So, oh, it's just so good. I just feel the love. Okay. Okay. Now, I want us to like hold that spirit with us as we go forward. Now I'm going to move into some of the like info, the stats. Okay. Notes about prevalence. So 1 in 3 high school students have been in an abusive relationship. 1 in 10 high school students has been purposefully hit, slapped, or physically hurt by boyfriend or girlfriend. So, so many things we could say about that. And feel free to just like share how you're impacted by that in the chat if you want. One of the things that immediately comes to mind for me when I think about the prevalence of teen dating violence is, or there are 2 things that come to mind right off the bat for me. One is, this is just, it's so cultural, like it's so embedded in our society. And like, it's not just like a couple shady characters or something, you know, I mean, I feel like there's this mythology about who uses abusive behavior and, you know, we're just gonna locate them and then, you know, put them somewhere else, like they're gonna magically go somewhere, you know, but it's like, this is such a huge issue. This is such a huge issue. And it's, well, okay, I'm gonna collect my thoughts, but basically when we start talking about solutions and interventions, I really think we need to step away from a lot of like punitive solutions and move toward a lot of different kinds of accountability. I'm a really big fan of kind of transformative justice approaches. And just like also a really big fan of recognizing that we all have the capacity to cause harm. And depending on our social location and identity, all this stuff, we're more vulnerable to causing certain kinds of harm that, you know, more like we have this capacity. And so how are we relating to our own, like the ways violence is operating in our own bodies and our own thoughts? Because I really, really think that's what it's going to take to really get to really having a violence-free world. Okay, some other little infographic things. Only 9% of abused teens seek help. And I just like, that just feels just like so kind of sad and scary and just brings up so many questions for me. I imagine it does for folks, you all too. And only about 2/3 tell someone. So that's not I don't, and I'll just be like transparent that I don't know how that we're defining seek help, but I'm assuming it means like take some action versus just like share with someone. Obviously that can be a way of seeking help. But just kind of wanting to emphasize like how there's this big gap. 81% of parents believe teen dating abuse is not an issue. 80% of teens believe teen dating abuse is a serious issue. That is from 2018, just to put that in perspective. And then this other infographic over here, again, just elaborating on this divide between, in this case, parents and young people, teens, tweens. And this is focused on parents, but in a lot of the research that I was looking at, it carries pretty, like a lot of like adult authority figures. There are similar statistics here. So yeah, like so hard to have those conversations. And yeah, so what do you think about that? I'll take a minute to let people ponder and add to the chat if you want. Also okay to just think to yourself. I think my big question is like, well, why is this happening? Maybe people are just thinking on their own.
I'll add to it, really makes me think about our culture and our media and like what teens and youth are seeing. And I saw there was a point from Teresa too, saying that feeling like a lot of teenagers who are experiencing violence might have also seen it when they were younger growing up. And I think, yeah, that's absolutely a really big piece in thinking about that intergenerational patterns that are often passed down. It's unfortunate, but very true.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate that. What type of training can we do for these kids to learn how to seek help? For sure. Think like even thinking about language, like helping to access language to even be able to describe some of these things. I also think of training that grown-ups need to be able to do a better job listening. Therapeutic areas for kids to express themselves. Yeah, right. So maybe I think people just see it as normal. Yeah, so maybe like not even knowing that there's something to share always. And we'll talk about that too, like where's that line between unhealthy and abusive? Behaviors are normalized. Yeah, these are all great thoughts. I don't, I don't have like the answer, but I think it's cool to just stay curious about those things. Yep. Guilt and shame. Yep. Thinking about, thanks Mary for sharing your own experience in high school. Yeah, totally agree. And I think for the people, who are past high school, thinking about what that was like, like I'm kind of thinking about the kinds of conversations I had with my parents. And, just like how, how cringy. Oh my gosh, some of them were. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for your participation. And for those of you who are participating not on the chat, I appreciate you too. Okay, kind of shifting gears. I thought I'd just name some kind of basic definitions. And this might be really familiar for some people, but I just want to be sure that we all are kind of like operating from the same foundation. And as always, feel free to chime in if you have things to add or ways that you agree or disagree with anything that I'm saying. In my work at the Domestic Abuse Project, I most often use this definition of abuse, which is a pattern of violence that's used to maintain power and control. I think there are times it's useful to make a distinction between abuse and violence. Violence is something that's super broad and like happening in a bazillion different ways, whether it's physical, psychological, emotional, and like often abusive dynamics can be present in a lot of different kinds of violence, but it might also serve us to be at times talking specifically about abuse or specifically about bullying or specifically about kind of like systemic oppression or like the violence of racism. And that like specificity in language is important in like being able to address what we're talking about. And then how is teen dating violence different than dating violence? I think teen dating violence, just dating violence with teens. And because we're talking about a specific group of people, there are specific ways those dynamics play out, which we'll get to in a minute. I just want to make a note about that again, kind of bringing in this potential place for some adultism or adultist conditioning, just to be sure that we're not assigning any kind of hierarchy to teen dating violence or dating violence. Just as important, just as serious, and we're just talking about this specific population. Okay. Different types of abuse. And this is, I'll give a content trigger warning here that I'm gonna talk kind of specifically about some of these. So physical abuse can be hitting, kicking, slapping, but also like pinching, biting. Sexual abuse, anytime anyone uses any kind of like force or coercion to get someone to do something that they're not comfortable with. Emotional and psychological abuse, name calling, put downs. We'll talk in a minute specifically about gaslighting. Cyber or digital abuse is a really, really big issue with teens, tweens, young people. I don't know if any of you all that are here right now want to weigh in on that. But, you know, it's like as we are kind of increasingly using devices in our world, in our day-to-day, in our relationships, and especially now during COVID, that's a really big way that these kind of interpersonal dynamics play out. I also want to, again, kind of like call out some adultism maybe here in like, I've heard people talk about like, oh, young people and their devices, always on their phone. And just want to say too, that I think like devices aren't inherently one way or another. Like they can be used to perpetuate violence. They can also be used to organize a revolution. And young people are super, super good and crafty and creative about how to do that stuff. Financial abuse, controlling money, not letting someone get to work, legal or systems abuse. So like court process can be super traumatizing and retriggering. Religious abuse. So thinking about any kind of like religious idea that's used to exploit systems of power and put one person in power over another person, or one like group of people in power over another group of people. Other forms of abuse, just want to name that like abuse can look a lot of different ways. This is not an exhaustive list. it's mostly thinking about like a pattern of violence that's used to maintain power and control. So looking at like how the behavior is impacting another person. Just gonna peek at the chat real quick. Stalking, yeah, for sure. It is so bad, yes. But yeah, so basic definitions there. This is the Duluth model. This is called the power and control wheel. And it's kind of the heart of, again, the Duluth model of adult intimate partner violence. This is, was an intervention developed for people who use abusive behaviors to stop using abusive behaviors. It was created in Duluth to try to help people moving through the criminal justice system. I have my whole critique of all the things, but this, in a lot of ways, this model was super revolutionary and changed a lot of lives. And I have a lot of respect and gratitude for the people that did this work. It was super victim-centered. The process that folks went through to develop the model was really, there was just a lot of care and consideration put into that. And coming back to this conversation about our lenses, like Duluth is about 2 hours north of me in Minneapolis, super white, very, very white, like very consistently at like 92 or 93% white. So when I think about, again, the kind of like lenses that people are bringing, and who kind of gets to tell the story about what domestic violence is or what teen dating violence is, this model is the most widely used court accredited model to address abusive behaviors. And let me organize my thoughts for just like a minute. So it's kind of like the dominant story, but it came out of a community that was pretty homogenous. And so no judgment about like the needs of white, straight, cis women. Like everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves love. Everyone deserves healthy and respectful relationships. And it's really important that we are all working toward that. And as we like bring other voices, other people to the table, our narratives need to change to be able to like accommodate the needs of different groups of people. So I'm just thinking about specifically male privilege used here. And again, like a lot of the research, like it's kind of like pretty common in the research for it to be super gendered, very, again, ciscentric, very heterocentric. So meaning like focused mostly on straight people, and is talked about as like exclusively a gendered issue. And although it is a gendered issue, it's also race impacts this issue, class impacts this issue, etc. So I'm just going to take a minute. I'm just going to read the headings, but I have to move my little chat window. Using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming, using children, using male privilege, using economic abuse, using coercion and threats. So like I'm thinking about, just like whose needs are most met by this and whose needs might not be met by this. How can we take kind of like the medicine of this model, but also expand the conversation to include everyone that's impacted by teen dating violence, intimate partner violence, which is everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Carrie. Me too. Okay, this is the teen adaptation. And I'm just going to read the headings on these two. Peer pressure, anger, emotional abuse, using social status, intimidation, minimize, deny, blame, threats, sexual coercion, isolation, exclusion. I think I said peer pressure already. But yeah, kind of the first thing I noticed about the teen adaptation is that male privilege is not included on here. But I'm going to try to go back to, or maybe I can't. Is there a way I can go back to the previous slide again? Found it. Okay. So again, just taking a minute to notice differences and similarities. Just to kind of like start us thinking about what the unique needs of young people might be, or how power and control is playing out. Do I have a link for the teen adaptation? Yeah, I think that everyone is gonna have access to all of these materials. But oh, and you know what? I didn't include, I'll find a way to get my contact information to people too. You can feel free to reach out. Okay. Anyone want to mention anything that felt significant? I'll just leave a minute. Yep, you're welcome. So one of the things that, again, like when I was in my like stage of this PowerPoint where I was like, oh, I need all the data. Like, furiously, like so many tabs open on my computer, goodness. But like one of the things that came up a lot was that teen dating violence isn't as gendered. And again, like mostly a lot of information about cis straight relationships. But just to start to think about like why that might be, why might it be less, like the trend is less cis males, cis men using violence against cis women. Can I put the teen wheel back? Yeah, for sure. Fit in with the cool kids. Yeah, for sure. That's like such a big, friends are so important. Belonging is like such a basic need that we experience. Such an important part of health and well-being. So what does it mean when there's kind of that tension playing out? Like belonging also means that you might experience some harm or belonging. Okay. We are going to, oh, thanks, Mary. Sweet. Okay, we're going to move on, but again, I think everyone's going to have access to all, oh yeah, because it's recorded, duh, okay. Okay. Okay, I wanted to include a definition of gaslighting specifically because I think it is a little bit tricky, like kind of anything can be gaslighting. And this is, again, just like a definition, quick Google search, and I'll talk about why I like it. But first, a form of psychological abuse where a person or group makes someone question their sanity, perception of reality, or memories. People experiencing gaslighting often feel confused, anxious, and unable to trust themselves. So I like this because it's for a couple of reasons. it says person or group. And I think that's important because as we're talking about like systemic oppression, racism, sexism, adultism, like there's a form of collective gaslighting that happens that's kind of the same as interpersonal gaslighting, but just playing out on a broader cultural level. So I think about like whitewashing history, and to, as an example, and then to also bring in, again, the adultism, that perspective. It's like there is this collective like, oh, teens, teens are just like angsty and hormonal. And, it's just so dismissive. It's it's so minimizing. And I think that's just this example of the way gaslighting plays out kind of like collectively. Yeah, and then to also name the kind of like gaslighting that plays out interpersonally. Do people have like examples of gaslighting that they want to put in the chat? Or do people have questions about gaslighting, maybe? You can let me know as we go. Yeah, Carly wrote, moving objects slightly and then telling the person they're crazy for thinking so. That's actually where the term originated. So I think it was a play about a husband and wife, and the husband very over time slowly changed these small things, just like the dimmer of the gas light, I think is actually where it came from. And it was a way of like making his wife doubt her reality and thereby like having more control. So super effective way of having power and control over another person if you're telling them what the reality is. Yeah, right. And it can also be like super, thank you, Tiffany, I see you. And thanks for your vulnerability. I think that, yeah, I just appreciate it. Can be super direct. Like, I never said that. And it's like, well, I was right there. Very just like bewildering, crazy making, such a terrible feeling. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for your contributions. We can keep talking about it. Let's see, I added a couple other examples up here because I think something that gets hard is like it does get complicated. I think like when does something go from unhealthy to abusive? And actually I'm just noticing time, so I better get going. But here's some examples of behaviors that are controlling and can be abusive. Demands their partner run things by them before doing them, makes you feel guilty to get their way. If you blame your partner for everything that goes wrong in a relationship, lots of calling or texting, if your partner needs to know where you are at all times. Those are all things to kind of like look out for. Or, like if you're worried about them, like you might look for some resources. And just for folks that are writing to the panelists, I see you. I'm going to keep going because of time, but not because what you're sharing isn't important. Or yeah. Okay. We are gonna listen to this really just a little bit. And for this part, this is a podcast.
I can explain.
Can you all hear my sound?
The story is about a teenager in a situation where everybody in her life thought they knew exactly what was going on with her and what she should do. It seemed so
I saw your picture. I saw a little girl in size with a black eye. So I thought to myself, what's going on? I said, did you get into a fight? And you said, no. But you were like, it's a long story. You'll get to know me.
I had a black eye for the whole first week. I thought people were thinking that I got beat up by a girl or something. That I'm soft. Do the dance. Nicole's my best friend, but I call her my stepsister because my mom and her dad used to date. We all live together, kind of like a family. Who calls her Nicole? Everyone else calls her by her nickname.
My name's Nikki Boombox, but no, I'm sorry.
She was with me when I first met. I don't want to use his actual name. What should his name be in my story?
Doo-doo face.
I'm gonna call him Tony, the guy who became my first serious boyfriend. I met him the summer after 8th grade. By the time we started dating, I was 14, and he was 21. 6 years, 6 months, and 6 days older than me. 666. It's creepy, right? Nicole remembers when we met him.
But don't get me wrong, he fooled me too. He fooled all of us. I really thought he was actually really good. I was like, oh my God, he's really nice. I would never expect him to actually ever lay a hand on you.
So, what do you think drew me to him in the first place? Like, what made me start liking him?
His looks. Can't deny it. The fact that he's old.
He's short, with tan skin, big pretty eyes, and an Italian schnoz. He has tattoos and a clean-cut beard. When you think of that arrogant guy that all the girls want, that's Tony. He walks with confidence, dresses flashy, and wears big chains.
But he also made you feel like you were special, like you were wanted. He was actually putting some effort into it. He would text you back. He would pick you up from the school. He didn't even try to kiss you the first time you hung out.
It doesn't matter about the age. I really couldn't stop smiling. Or as Nicole would say, cheesing OD.
Politics. No, you're cheesing OD. I've never seen you cheese like that.
When we first got together, he liked that I was smart and young and pretty. He says girls become whores. I was getting 90s when I started the 9th grade. I would show him my report card, but he didn't pay it any mind. He just saw high school as a place for guys to bag girls. He didn't tell me to skip school. He just punished me when I went. He'd ignore me after I came back, or show up at school and flirt with girls in front of me. So I just hung out with him in his room all day instead of going to class. I didn't want to think I was cheating. I wasn't even talking to Nicole.
Everything you thought was just about him. Like, you just completely stopped caring about everything, and he really had that control over you.
How did I look back then?
You look like a ghost. Completely dead, skinny as hell. It's like, you still look good, don't get me wrong, but you still had that dead look in your face, like you weren't happy at all.
He was verbally abusive way before he became physically abusive. He talked to me so nasty that I could feel it. The bruises clear up, but the words stick with you, and they change how you act. He would tell me, "You're boring. You're awkward. You're the weirdest of the weird. You'll never fit in anywhere." And I believed him. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I didn't talk to anyone anymore, including my mom. I lied to her about how old he was and started coming home late, or not at all.
I was livid, and I wanted you home.
This is my mom. She used to be a drug addict, but she's been clean for 10 years now. She's pretty ditzy and forgetful, but she's definitely there for me. What were you doing then?
Worrying, cursing, yelling.
At me.
At you. At him.
Try punishing me, taking my things away.
Punishment, taking your things away. It didn't matter.
Nothing she did worked, because I wouldn't let it. She knew I was the only one that could stop myself from seeing him.
Okay, I'm gonna pause there. But if you're interested, I think that, you know, like, again, taking care of yourself, it's okay to like not have capacity to like hear about these things all the time, or at any time. But I think it's just important to listen to like young people's experience. And I had some questions. It takes a long time for the slide to load. So I actually might continue just with it in the window here. Sorry. I see some folks starting to answer the questions. Okay. Where we're at. We're not going to spend a ton of time discussing these again, just because of time, but maybe I'll just point out like the different relationships that were represented. So thinking back to like who young people are wanting to talk to or feel safe talking to, friends, like often, you know, parent, but like obviously Rainey's relationship with her mom, you know, there were some parts of it that felt supportive, some that didn't. But it definitely seemed to me like Nicole was more of a safe place for that conversation to be happening for Rainey. Okay. This is another tool, again, developed in partnership with young people. I like it because it's just, I think, like normalizing how it can be difficult sometimes to really know where the line is between unhealthy and abusive. And like, this is a question that gets asked, I think, a lot of the time. And yes, so the story will be in the PowerPoint slides, so you'll be able to reference it in the recording. But just a couple examples, I'm going to read the communicating. So in a healthy relationship, you talk openly about problems, listen to each other, and respect each other's opinions. Unhealthy, the example is when problems arise, you fight or don't discuss them at all. Abusive, someone is communicating in a way that's hurtful, threatening, insulting, or demeaning. So I like this because I think it's just like, again, helpful to have like clarity around these questions, either to kind of like confront like gaslighting, like, oh, you know, every relationship has its ups and downs. I think about like, that's true. And abuse is not a down, it's different. Yeah. So this is a great tool. I think it's super helpful. We are gonna skip this scenario and start moving into a conversation about what you can do. So the first slide, I'm thinking about, again, like just the importance of culture on how and when and to whom violence happens. Educating yourself is great. Listening to young people, or if you're a young person, listening to yourself. Getting familiar with resources and initiatives, providing young people with resources. Work to take responsibility and be accountable for the ways you've harmed, big or small. I mean, this is something that we can all get better at. Take seriously that your day-to-day thoughts and actions impact our collective reality and safety. These are some really cool things that teens are doing. And I just like always love it so much, like creativity. When love is mutual, that's so cool. This is the hashtag that was created by you can read more about it. I'm going to keep going, but I can say no, but feel safe to say yes. When my partner understands me, when you love my smile instead of my nudes, when we try to compromise, when we disagree about something, when my partner tells me I'm beautiful, boundaries, etc. Super cool. This is a little YouTube series that is made by and for youth. I think my sound is still on. We'll just watch like a few seconds of this.
Good evening. Tonight's special program involves the students of Meigs High, a school community shaken by the news of an alleged sexual assault by a standout senior. Students are protesting on social networks. The school is split in support of both the victim and the perpetrator, and is forcing members of the community to take a look at themselves. Our program is an in-depth exploration of the relationships of 3 young men living in our city. Tonight, we invite you to journey with them down the halls as they navigate love, identity, and adulthood, and we explore what happens when class is dismissed.
So that one is talking specifically about young cis men, toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity, and is made by young people, like I said before, I think. This last one is an example of this initiative that was created by teens in Hawaii, and I think is really cool to like explore the kind of like intersection of indigenous populations, cultures, and dating violence. And I think about, again, just kind of how important it is to talk about intersectionality as we're talking about different kinds of violence and teen dating violence. Okay. Let's see. So I have a couple specific slides here directed at what your role is or who you are. I'm going to do my best here. Oh, I've been too chatty, Okay. If you're a parent, caregiver, or teacher, listen, express concern and unconditional love or positive regard. So that can look like, hey, I'm really worried. I saw, this person said this thing to you and you looked really impacted. Just like want you to know that I really care about you and I want you to be happy. I'm here if you need me. Be supportive and understanding, respect their choices, even if you don't agree with them. So thinking about abuse as like taking away or like having power and control over someone, one of the things that we're looking to do and however we're intervening or however we're addressing that is to restore power and restore control. So to be, and I'll kind of jump to that last point on there too, to be careful about how your needs and feelings and reactions might be different than what your child, student, etc. needs, and how, like when you learn that someone that you care about is in an abusive relationship, especially when you're feeling really protective of someone, it's really like can create really, really powerful feeling responses, and all of that is okay. It is totally okay and understandable and like deserves a lot of time and attention. And often if you're supporting someone who's experiencing abuse or using abuse, it requires that you also have support and a space to be held in what your experience is of that. So that when you're with someone who's experiencing abuse or using abusive behavior, you can be present and attuned to what they're needing, which is super important with young people because, again, we already know it's really, really hard to bring that conversation. Focusing on behaviors, not a person. So if someone senses that you're not very approving of the relationship, they might not feel safe to speak with you about what's happening in the relationship. But you can talk about that in terms like, well, like the example before, like, hey, I noticed this. It seemed like it didn't feel very good to you. How do you feel about it? Believe them, take them seriously, help develop a safety plan. And there's a tool and a resource that I'll get to in a moment. Again, for adults, these are some things just to pay attention to. None of them are like a sure sign of anything, but it's just important, I think, to notice. Attendance, lack of interest, change in schedule, changes in behavior or schoolwork, little social contact with anyone but the dating partner, unexplained bruises or injuries, making excuses or apologizing for a partner's inappropriate behavior, isolation from friends. Things to note. If you're a friend of someone experiencing abuse, there's a lot of overlap here with parent, caregiver, or teacher. So maybe I'll leave this. I think I would say, like, if you're worried about a friend, there will actually go to a website that I think has a lot of really cool resources and that you can like follow up with too. But again, don't be afraid to reach out. It's okay to like express concern. When you do, to just try to be as non-judgmental as possible in that, and to know that like the trust of the relationship is really what's going to help keep that person safe. So, and that can look like, you know, even when an abuse, like if someone chooses to leave their abusive relationship, they might feel like lonely or miss that person or still love that person and that or care about that person, and that's okay. And it just might be hard to like get support for some of that if it feels like there's a judgment of that. That makes sense. If you're a friend of someone who's using abusive behavior, I just want to normalize, it can be really hard to say like, hey, you know, that's not cool. And like to maybe be met with an excuse and to really be like, you know, I have to insist that I really don't like that. I care about you. I love you. And what you're doing isn't okay. I think it's really hurting someone. And like, it's important not to deny, or it's important to deny attempts to deflect responsibility, even knowing that the response might not be very like great. Always, sometimes. Important that you believe survivors, especially when it's inconvenient or feels really hard. Keep in touch with your friend. Like, often people who are using abusive behavior really need a lot of support over the long term. Set a positive example and support them in connecting to professional help, which there are a lot of services. DAP is one place in Minneapolis. I would encourage everyone to look up location-specific resources. This is a comfort in, dump out graphic, actually, that Mary reminded me of like 2 minutes before the presentation, and that I wanted to be sure to include. And basically, it's just an illustration of the direction of support. So like if you're supporting someone who's experiencing abuse, then you're supporting into that person. But if you need support in your role as someone who's supporting, you're gonna move out, dump out to receive that support. Sorry, I totally didn't. Mary, do you want to add anything to that? I feel like you have such good ways of talking about that? Like stumbling over my
No.
words right now.
No, you're doing great. I guess actually to pull something else in, the other thing I'm thinking of right now that can both feel really relevant for folks, but is also something really good to use when supporting other folks is just the airplane and oxygen mask metaphor of when you're on an airplane, they always say, put your own oxygen mask on before other people. And I think that can go towards the vicarious trauma aspect as well. But it also speaks to this, like sometimes you do need to dump out before you can do more comforting in, and that's okay. Just prioritizing your own needs as well so that you can continue to support over the long term.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mary. Ugh, you're awesome. Okay. If you are or think you might be experiencing abuse, telling someone you trust can be super, super scary and super, super important. Even if it's just calling a hotline where you can like maintain some anonymity and have more control over like who potentially could have access to that information or whatever. Yeah, just invitation there. Know that it's okay to care about or love someone who's being abusive, but that abuse isn't okay and that it's never your fault. So often, like part of the impact of the abusive behavior is the feeling that you're responsible. And it's also fairly common for someone who's using abusive behavior in a relationship to feel really victimized. So just watching for kind of like that difference between someone's feeling, if that makes sense, and like the direction of the violence. Understand healthy, unhealthy, and potentially abusive behaviors. So I think like we talked about it in the chat a little bit, like sometimes these behaviors are like some abusive behaviors are super normalized. So it can help to just like educate yourself about what is or isn't okay. Document abusive behaviors as much as possible and create a safety plan. And I am going to go real quick. This is an awesome resource. It's got the quick escape on it. And it just like totally walks you through this safety plan and helps you kind of like inventory some resources that you have that you might not have been aware of. I think it does a good job of like taking into account what might be some like cultural considerations or considerations about your identity. And then really walks through like support for a lot of different parts of the process, whether you're like wanting to stay in your relationship and just have the abusive behavior stop, or if you're wanting to like leave your relationship, or if you have left your relationship and you're like wanting to stay safe after leaving, that can be a helpful tool to support you. If you're using abusive behavior or worried that your behavior might be abusive, I took some pointers here, or I listed some things here. Listen to the person that you've hurt. Take responsibility. No matter what, you're always responsible for your choice to use abuse. So no matter what is happening, no matter how the other person is behaving, we are responsible for our own choices to use violence or not in the way that we are interacting with other people. Understand your reasons for using the abusive behavior, but that's not the same thing as making excuses. So understanding the reason is a tool to help support your accountability. Face the fear of accountability, separate guilt from shame. Don't expect anyone to forgive you. No one has to forgive you. People might choose to end a relationship with you. Taking responsibility or being accountable to behavior doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have that relationship back. Connect with a professional and be sure you have systems in place for ongoing support and accountability. Few other resources. That's Not Cool. The story at the beginning, Fatima, that I shared is from this website. She's an ambassador. There are a bunch of other cool young people doing a lot of really cool things. And this is a great resource in terms of like education about healthy relationships, about teen dating violence. We'll quickly watch this PSA. It's like 30 seconds.
G morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back.
Are you with your friends? That's lame.
We're in a huge fight right now. XO.
What'd you dream about?
Something I
Me?
did. Are you on your way to the
I'm
mall?
lonely.
Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
So many layers to that 30-second snippet. They have a lot of other PSAs and recordings on the website that I think are super helpful and super accessible just for anyone. And then Love is Respect is another really great resource. It's I didn't mention this at the beginning, but it's Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and Love is Respect there's a whole campaign happening this week actually, and it's Know Your Worth. And so there's been like a theme of every day, and today is Self-Care Day. So in keeping with the theme of the day, totally encourage everyone here to do something even tiny that's really sweet for themselves at some point before going to bed, or maybe going to bed is the thing. And then here are, and I'm realizing that I'm so sorry. I guess I did include the National Domestic Violence Hotline, but Day One and Domestic Abuse Project are both Minnesota and Midwest-ish specific. So sorry, folks who are not in Minnesota for that kind of oversight. But hopefully you're familiar with some of the resources in your area or can become familiar. So glad. Okay, awesome. Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, now all the slides are done. I hope to have more time for questions and discussion. You all have been really awesome about participating in the chat, so I really appreciate that. But if anyone does have thoughts or contributions in the next couple minutes, I'm happy to do what I can.
And I would also say, feel free to reach out to Caitlin or to I or to both of us. Our information should be included. But yeah, super appreciate you all being here and super appreciate Women's Advocates for hosting us. And yeah, I'll let you, I was just going to talk about, you're going to get an email, but I'll let you talk about that, Brenda.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those of us who didn't hear the announcement at the beginning, I don't mind repeating it at all. Just as a reminder, you will get a follow-up email with all of these incredible resources and slides and links. I promise you'll have them with the same email that you used to register for this webinar. You'll also receive a link to the recording once that gets uploaded on YouTube. You can also subscribe to our channel as well. We have over 40 webinars now in our library. So this is an incredible addition to that collection and series. So we'll have that available to you all as well. And I'm going to send the instructions in the chat right now if you would like to request a certificate of attendance. And so that will be emailed to you. It is a Friday, so if you don't get it by Monday, please don't call the crisis hotline and ask for it. That has happened before. We appreciate any patience that can be afforded to us. Those instructions will also be in the email. So if you don't have a chance to copy and paste them, no worries. You'll get them in your email as well. And you'll also be sent to a feedback post-webinar survey. So that I just sent it in the chat just in case you want to fill it out now, but it should pop up right when you exit the webinar. So we would really appreciate any feedback that you have for Caitlin, for Dap, for Mary, for Women's Advocates, anything you want to see from them again. We'd be happy to facilitate that if there's anything specific. And if there are any questions, I'll include Caitlin's contact information as well. So thank you so much. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. Some people might have off on Monday. I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone. But thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording.